Hello. This video is about selected literary terms. When I was planning this, I knew which terms I wanted to talk about, and I was trying to look for a way of kind of bringing them together or finding a theme. This set of literary terms is not even close to being complete, so it was hard to find a way of bringing everything together, and I finally said, you know what? I'm just going to call it what it is. These are terms that come up often in my classes. I'm going to remind you that I am an ESL teacher. I'm not a literature teacher, but in high-level ESL classes, we do need to use some of these literary terms, and so that's what this video is about. I will explain the term, I will give some examples, and then we will talk about different forms, different parts of speech that we can use each one of these terms in. So let's get started. First of all, this is not a spelling mistake. It shouldn't say smile. It should say simile. So the meaning of the word simile is it's a comparison that uses like or as. The comparison finds something that the two objects have in common, and it says this is like that. So for example, we might make a comparison between a person and an animal. Some specific examples: you were as brave as a lion. So here I'm saying you and a lion, you're the same, you're similar in terms of bravery. He's as strong as an ox. He's very, very strong. That movie was like watching paint dry. Can you figure out what the meaning here is? That was a really, really boring movie. Okay, let's take a look at some forms. So, we use simile only as a noun. Now, the other literary terms that we look at, there will be different forms. This maybe isn't a good example to start with because we really only use it in its noun form. He uses similes in a humorous way when he talks about his brother. So we would use the word simile just to talk about other language. So, yes, so here's him talking about his brother in a humorous way. Like him, the plan was simple. So here we're saying the plan was simple, which is whatever, we don't know what the plan is, it doesn't matter. The plan isn't very complicated, which is usually a good thing. But when we call a person simple, it's an insult. So like him, the plan was simple. It doesn't sound like an insult at first until you stop and think about it. Unlike him, it might work. So here again, we have another insult with a simile. So unlike him, the plan might work, but he doesn't. So here in these two short lines and these two similes, somebody has said some not very nice things about his brother. He said he's not smart and he's lazy. So similes can be fun. Okay, let's take a look at the next literary term. We did simile first on purpose because it's going to help us understand this next one, which is a metaphor. Okay, so the metaphor meaning is a comparison that does not use like or as. So similes use like or as, metaphors do not use like or as. A metaphor say that something is something else, even though, of course, it's not. The comparison is often between two things or ideas that are otherwise quite unrelated, that are quite different, which is what makes the metaphor interesting. Let's look at some examples. His look was ice cold. Well, his body temperature was actually normal. What we're saying here is that he was very angry or very upset about something. My sister is a shining star. Well, actually, she's a person just like the rest of us. So the metaphor is just simply that she is like a shining star, but we don't use the word like because that would make it a simile. Out, out, brief candle. Now, do you recognize this one? It's only a few words. This actually is from Shakespeare. This is from the play Macbeth. Shakespeare is comparing life, living, to a candle, which eventually goes out. To give you a little bit of context, in the play Macbeth, when Macbeth hears that his wife has died, this is what he says. He's talking about life in general, out, brief candle. No, not a lot of sympathy for his wife when she dies. It's fairly late in the play when he's already gone a little bit crazy. Anyway, let's move on. This isn't a video about Shakespeare. Let's take a look at some forms. So first of all, the form we've been looking at, a noun. We also, which is metaphor, we also say metaphorically and metaphorical, so the adverb and the adjective form. So let's take a look at each of these. Sun is a common metaphor for happiness. We talk about brightness or light in the sky. It's a common metaphor for happiness. In stories, lots of good things happen on bright, sunny days. Metaphorically, it's okay, relax. His heart wasn't really broken. He was speaking metaphorically. Okay, his heart was still where it should be and it was still working properly. And then as an adjective, metaphorical statements are often very poetic. Okay, so we're going to move on here and we're going to actually shift category. So we're going to talk about figurative language. So figurative language is a statement that is non-literal. Okay, so that's language that is creative, that's often poetic. Metaphors and similes are both types of figurative language. And there are many other examples, many other kinds and styles of figurative language. But again, I teach an ESL class, not a literature class. So I'm going to just focus on those two examples of figurative language. So some examples. She's drowning in a sea of troubles. Okay, well, she's very sad, but her life is not really in danger. I'm just speaking figuratively. He has a mountain of work to do. He has a lot of work. It's like a mountain. Some forms of figurative. So first of all, the adjective, figurative, and then the adverb, figuratively. We've already seen a couple of examples of me using this. We'll take a look at some more. Her use of figurative language, I don't know, maybe she's a poet or a writer. Her use of figurative language is both unique and emotional. And then figuratively, I was speaking figuratively. I'm not really going to kill you. It's okay, relax. I was angry, but I'm calmer now. Okay, now the reason I wanted to talk about the word figuratively or figurative was because I want to contrast that with another word, which is literal. So literal, the meaning of that is a statement that means exactly what it says. In other words, it is non-figurative. Another way of saying this, it says what it means and it means what it says. There's no need for interpretation. Okay? My sister is a shining star. What? No. My sister is my sibling from the same parents. Okay, so that's a literal meaning or a literal use of the word sister and explaining about her. Let's look at some examples. Literal translations are sometimes very funny. So if you've ever used a translation program and it goes from one language into another and it misses the meaning of an idiom, sometimes the results can be quite funny. When we translate, the meaning is what is important, not the exact words. We could also use it this way. He's very literal. If you ask him to wait a minute, he will wait exactly 60 seconds. And normally when we say something, just wait a minute, that doesn't mean exactly 60 seconds. It just means a while. But if somebody understands exactly 60 seconds, we can say that they are being very literal in their understanding. Okay, he does exactly what he is told. He's very literal. So when you give him instructions, just remember that. Okay, so let's take a look at form. Really, there's only a couple. So there's literal, which is the adjective, and then literally, which is the adverb. So literal language is usually specific and precise, but it's often not very interesting. I'm not sure that's true. Literal language can be interesting, but it's probably not so poetic. Literally now is the adverb. Okay, hold on and listen carefully. If I say this, if I say it was literally minus 50 degrees Celsius, that does not mean it was really cold. That does not mean I was chilly. That means if I went and I looked at a thermometer, it would actually say minus 50 degrees Celsius. Okay? There's no exaggeration, there's no poetry, there's no comparison. It is exactly, I mean what I say and I say what I mean. It was 50 degrees below zero. Now, the reason I wanted to be really clear about this is because this is a word that a lot of people misuse. And the meaning of words changes over time, and there's really no point in trying to fight against that. But the problem is the way that people misuse this word is often the exact opposite of what it actually means. And you will hear native speakers misuse this. And it's a funny thing, because if a native speaker makes a mistake or uses a word improperly, people don't worry about it. But if a non-native speaker uses a word improperly, everybody, oh, that's not a good thing. I know, the world isn't fair. But the truth is, if you're a non-native speaker, if you make the same mistake, people will judge you. By the way, that's not just my opinion. That's actually based on research that I vaguely remember from when I did my master's degree. Okay, so you might hear, and I have heard this is a real life example that I heard. The bus was so crowded this morning. There were literally 1 million people on it. No, there weren't. Literally is not the same as figuratively. You could maybe say there were figuratively 1 million people on it. That would sound a little bit strange, but you definitely cannot say there were literally 1 million people on it. There's no way there were 1 million people on one bus. It just couldn't have happened. Another way that people misuse this is they say something like, I was literally shocked. Well, no, you can't do that. Or, I was literally so cold. Nope, that doesn't work either. What people are doing when they use literally this way is they're using it for emphasis. Well, this just doesn't work. And again, you will hear native speakers say this. My advice to you, though, is to not do it yourself, because people will think that it's a mistake if you say it. And again, I know the world isn't fair. You will hear these uses, but don't use them yourself, especially in formal or academic settings. The next literary term that we're going to look at looks a little bit funny. Before I say it, can you kind of say in your head what you think that's going to sound like? Euphemism. Euphemism. A euphemism is an indirect reference to something. It's a way to soften the power of an unpleasant thought or an unpleasant word. There are things that we don't like talking about. There's things that we wish weren't in the world. Bad news, I mean, when people die, we use euphemisms to soften the language that we're using to talk about some bad news or to talk about a negative situation. So let's look at some examples. She passed away last year. Now, do you know what that means? Well, we're using passed away instead of died. Okay. He's between jobs right now. Oh, well, that doesn't sound so bad. Yeah, he was doing this job, and then in a while he'll be doing another one. Right now he's between jobs. Well, that's a softer, nicer, gentler way of saying he's unemployed. He doesn't have a job. She's rather full-figured. Well, that's a nice way of saying she's fat. Now, when we use these euphemisms, do people know what they mean? Yes, but we're using words that soften what we're talking about. When you first learn a language, you often will learn kind of the basic words of that language. For example, fat or died. As you progress in the language, you get to a point where you can choose your language, your words a little bit more carefully, and you can communicate a little bit more softly, or you can communicate your meaning with a little bit more feeling, a little bit more control over what it is that you're saying. Okay, so let's take a look at forms of this. So we talk about euphemism, and we talk about euphemistic as an adjective, and we talk about euphemistically as an adverb. Let's take a look at each of these in action. Family planning is a euphemism for the term birth control. So some people think that the word birth control is a little bit too graphic, it's a little bit too sexual. And so we can use the word family planning because it sounds a little bit more separate from that. It's a little bit less direct. Okay, and the next one, euphemistic. She used a lot of euphemistic terms to tell us that we were being laid off. So we are going to lose our jobs, and she, instead of being very clear and very direct about that, she used other language to make it kind of seem not so bad, which is obviously just playing games with people. If people are going to lose their jobs, there's no way that you're going to make that sound like it's good news. I have a question for you. Laid off. Is that a euphemism for fired? No, it's not. If a person is fired from his or her job, it's because they haven't done a good job. Maybe they've been lazy, or they've been late for work, or they haven't been doing the work that is expected. If you're laid off, that means you don't have a job anymore, but the reason isn't because of what you did or what you didn't do. It's because the situation has changed and we just don't have work for you. We don't need this many workers anymore. So laid off is not a euphemism for fired. And the last one here, euphemistically. He spoke rather euphemistically about being transferred to a new job. So he made it sound like it was a great opportunity, but really the place where he was, they didn't want him there anymore, and they found a way to get rid of him. And it sounds like he maybe realized that, so he was talking about new opportunities instead of being shoved to the side. The reason that we use euphemisms is because they feel better. They don't feel as direct and as hard. The next word, the next term that we're going to look at also has to do with feeling, and that is connotation. Connotation is the emotional meaning that goes with a word. So just like euphemism, to get connotation, you have to start being fairly advanced in a language to get these. So connotations, we often talk about positive connotation or negative connotation, a good feeling or a bad feeling that goes with the word, but really there are a lot of other different connotations as well. Connotations can be positive and negative. They can also be humorous, they can be religious, they can be dark, they can be militaristic. When we use certain words, sometimes those words give us a certain type of feeling that goes with them as well. And these connotations, these feelings that go with words, can be very different in different cultures. So for example, the color white has different connotations in different cultures. In my culture, it means something that's pure and clean and new. In other cultures, in some Asian cultures, white refers, it's the color of death. In my culture, the color of death is black. So connotation is very culture specific. It depends what part of the world that we are from. Let's take a look at some examples. Youthful or childish? Well, are you saying that somebody is acting young, or they're acting like a little kid? that feels very different. Is somebody inquisitive, so they want to know, they're curious, or are they prying? Are they trying to get information that really is none of their business? Are they trying to see what's going on, even if it doesn't concern them? So are they curious, or are they nosy? Cemetery or graveyard. Well, it's the same place. Yeah, it is, but the feeling that goes with these words is different. So a cemetery is a place of rest, where a graveyard is a place of cold, dead bodies. So if you were writing a story around Halloween, or a horror story or a thriller story, you might use the word graveyard instead of cemetery because of the connotations that go with that. It's cold and wet and dead and not a nice place at all. Whereas cemetery, we often have the feeling of, maybe the sun is out, it's the middle of the day, the grass is growing, there's some flowers there that people have left, maybe some birds are singing. It's a place of calmness and of peace and of rest. So the feeling that goes with those two words is very different, even though both words refer to the same place. Let's take a look at some forms. So there's connotation or connote, which is a verb, but we don't use it all that often. And then connotative, which again is the adjective. It's not all that common, but anyway, I decided to put it here. So connotation, choose a word with a more positive connotation. This is too negative. So this sounds like an English teacher talking to a student, maybe in a literature class, saying, your word choice isn't communicating the meaning that I think you want to communicate. So connote. Shadows often connote unhappy events in stories. So bad things often happen on dark, shadowy, cold, windy days. Why? Well, because the connotation of that kind of weather is quite negative. Connotative. Using connotative terms can give writing extra layers of meaning. Now again, those last two, the verb and the adjective, they're not that common, but I put them in here, so if you hear them now, you will know what they mean. So if connotation is the emotional feeling, then a denotation is the actual meaning. So it's the simple, direct, literal meaning of a word. The dictionary definition of what something is without emotion attached to it. So let's take a look at some examples. Blue. Well, blue is a primary color. That is what it is. Home. Well, that's a dwelling place, a place where people live. And number 13, well, that's 6 plus 7 is 13. So these are all the denotations of definitions, or denotive definitions of these words. I'm going to also put the connotations of some of these words too, so you can see the difference. So blue, a primary color, well, the connotation is that it's sad. In English, blue is a sad color. How are you? I'm feeling kind of blue. Okay, interesting. Home, a dwelling place, yes, but there's also a connotation there of a warm and a cozy place. So he went to his residence, doesn't feel very warm. He went home, that feels warm and cozy and comfortable and safe. And number 13, this one is very cultural. In my culture, number 13 is, the connotation is with bad luck or with a curse, especially when it's on a Friday. So Friday the 13th is considered a very unlucky day. So the denotation, the form. All right, so denotation denotes. So there's the noun and the verb. Let's take a look here. The denotation of blue is one of the primary colors. So that's the direct dictionary meaning, okay? Denotes, this is actually, it's not very common that we use this as a verb. This is actually, and I've changed her name, but this is from the idea for this is from the door of my dentist's office. So on the door, it has her name, and then there's an asterisk, which is the name that we call that we give that extra little star there. Then there's an asterisk there, and if you go down to the bottom, lower down the door, it says denotes professional corporation. So even though it's her name there, the door says we're actually talking about a professional corporation. So she has incorporated. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, it's a legal thing to do with business. Don't worry about it. The point here is that that just by putting her name, in this case they're telling us, is that we are actually talking about a professional business. Okay. The next one is implication and inference. So I just said the next one. Actually, these are two and they go together. These are two of those things that just fit together. If you understand one, you're going to understand the other. They go together. So hopefully you see the idea here and you understand the symbolism. You can't have one without the other. They are opposite sides of the same thing. Some ideas are best explained with a story, and I think this is one of them. Before I start the story, I want to tell you that this was not my story. This was shared with me by one of my colleagues, and that colleague is a woman. So if you're going to write comments that I'm being sexist or something like that, it was a woman who told me this story. So don't get mad at me. Okay, so it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. A man and his wife are walking through the park, and they see another couple who are arm in arm. They're very happy, they're young, they're in love. And the wife looks over and she sees that the woman's wearing beautiful earrings. And she has a beautiful bracelet on and a lovely necklace. And she looks at her husband and she says, "Look at that woman with the beautiful earrings and the lovely bracelet and that gorgeous necklace." And the husband doesn't really understand what she's actually saying. So he just says, "Yeah, okay, yeah, they're nice." And she talks about them a little bit more, about the nice color and the shape. And then she looks at her husband and she says, "Her husband must really love her." Now this is the time when the husband better do some thinking, because what she's talking about is that other woman's jewelry. But what she's really saying is, "I want some, and you better get it for me." So, what she is saying and what he is supposed to understand, those two fit together like these two ideas, inference and implication. Let's start with implication. Implication is saying something indirectly, such as with a suggestion, rather than saying it directly. So when the wife says, "Her husband must really love her," she's not really commenting about their relationship. She's saying, without saying it, "If you love me, you should get me some jewelry like that." But she isn't saying it clearly, she's implying it. She's making the implication. So, let's look at some examples. He implied that they had been good friends when they were younger. So he made people think that he had been a close friend of the rock star, but he didn't actually say that. He just kind of implied it. "Oh yeah, we used to hang out sometimes." Well, yeah, twice when you were 6 years old. But if you say, "Oh, we used to hang out sometimes," it makes it sound like you were maybe good friends. The implication of her double checking everybody's work is that she does not trust her workers. When she checks people's work, she actually means that she doesn't think that they're honest. She wants to make sure they're not stealing anything from the company. Let's take a look at some forms of implication. Well, there's the noun form, implication, and there's also a verb form, which is to imply. So, he found the implication that he had cheated on the test insulting. So he was maybe having a talk with some friends and he told them he got a great mark, and his friends said, "Oh, I'd like to figure out how you did that." Well, they didn't say that he cheated, but they were making the implication, and he didn't like it. Next, He implied that if he didn't get the promotion, he would leave the company. So, you know, I've been at this company a long time, and I've worked very hard here, and I've really worked my way up, and I think it's time for a promotion. And if that doesn't happen, I don't know, I'm going to have to consider my options. Now, consider my options is a euphemism for I'm going to have to go look for a job someplace else. So he's not actually saying I'm going to leave the company, but he's implying it and saying, you know what, if this doesn't go the way I want it to, that might be the end of me in this company. I might leave. So now let's take a look at inference. It's basically the other half of implication. So if you imply something, you're saying it without saying it. If you infer something, you understand it without being told directly. So let's take a look at some examples. When she started turning off the lights, her guests inferred it was time to go home. Yeah, I think if I'm visiting somebody and they go around and they start switching off the lights, that's a pretty good sign that, you know, it's maybe time for me to go home. So she's implying very clearly, so she's saying it without actually saying it. Okay guys, it's late. I have to get up early in the morning. It's time for you to go. So she told her guests to go home without ever actually saying anything. From how she talked about the movie, he inferred that she would like to see it again. So she was so enthusiastic about the movie that he thought that she wanted to see the movie a second time. Let's take a look at some forms of inference. So inference, which we've been looking at, and infer. Now, like with a lot of these terms, there are other forms, but we're just going to stick with the ones that are most common. So, inference. His inference about her being pregnant was quite wrong. She had just put on weight. So, she didn't say that she was pregnant. He looked, oh, you're a little bit bigger than you used to be. When are you expecting? When is the baby coming? So he inferred that she was pregnant. Oh boy, she wasn't. I don't know if you've ever made that mistake. I never have. And unless a woman tells me that she is pregnant, unless I actually see the baby, if a woman doesn't tell me she's pregnant, I don't say anything. That's my rule. I'm never going to break it. All right. And to infer as a verb, when we saw the desks, this sounds like something students might say, when we saw the desks had been moved and the blackboard was clean, we inferred there was a test. So we came into the classroom, and this doesn't look like it normally does. Why did the teacher move everything and clean the blackboard? Ooh boy, maybe there's a test today. So the teacher didn't say anything about being a test, but by moving the furniture, the students are understanding that that might be the situation. So once again, I would just like to remind you that the way that I chose these was just quite simply the terms that come up in my class. So if you want to study literature, this probably isn't a very good list for you. If you want to study more advanced ESL and you're starting to look at a little bit of literature, well, this will get you started. Thank you very much for listening all the way through. There are some exercises that are below the video. So make sure you take a look at those, and thank you very much. Have a good day.